Joining us now, senior member of the House Armed Services Committee and former chair of the Intel Committee, Republican Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio. We really appreciate your coming on with us. There are those analysts who are calling this a war of choice, that there was no immediate threat. What did you see as the immediate threat or the justification for this decision?
Well, Mika, this certainly was an inevitable conflict, in that this really, if you take the linear aspect of this, all the way back from the JCPOA, where we had in the Obama administration the nuclear program that Iran had declared, where we were watching as Iran continued to have their nuclear enrichment. And really, Iran being the continued state sponsor of terrorism, their continuing buildup of their military, where Donald Trump took, decisive action recently last June against their nuclear enrichment facilities. And then Iran continuing to declare that they were going to continue nuclear enrichment and their continued buildup of their military. As we all know, Iran being declared enemy of the United States, with their chants of death to America, death to Israel, and the Trump administration calling Iran to the negotiating table, and they're clearly refusing, declaring that they were going to continue their nuclear enrichment, continue their military buildup. This was a continuing threat both to our operations in the Middle East, our allies in the Middle East, and to the United States.
I hear what you're saying, and I hear continuing threat, and that's for sure. I think it has been a continuing threat for a number of years now, decades. I'm curious, what are we learning, or what are you learning that was imminent, that this had to happen when it did? And what questions do you think should be answered if you had time with the president right now for the American people about the risk of possible escalation now and the loss of American lives? Sure.
Well, Mika, any losses are incredibly difficult, and our hearts certainly go out to the families of those who have been lost, and certainly the losses even in the area. I think, when you take the word imminent, you have to look at the intersection of both opportunity and threat, and you can't. You have to make certain that intersection doesn't occur past the opportunity to be able to take out that threat. We've seen certainly with North Korea where that intersection passed that line to be able to take out the opportunity for North Korea to be that continuing or overarching threat, where today North Korea is a nation that threatens homeland of the United States itself. Here, the administration is taking action where Iran no longer, as they continue to try to impact their missile program, their space programs, which would impact their ability to become an ICBM threat, their nuclear ambitions, even their drone capability, which is a regional threat, significantly diminishing Iran's ability to be a threat to the United States, our allies, Europe, and then ultimately the homeland of the United States and their nuclear ambitions.
So, Congressman, there has been some reporting that Pentagon officials did brief members of congressional staff to say, look, that we do not have intelligence that there were an imminent threat. But let's talk about what's going to happen here in the next couple of days. There's likely a war powers resolution vote. Please tell us how you will side on that. And what else do you want to hear as the administration finally does deliver more specific briefings to the Hill? What questions do you want answered?
Well, at this point, I think it's like the president has been very clear, as has the Pentagon, as to the systematic work that is being done to eliminate the military capabilities of Iran. And this certainly is in everyone's interest. And you see now our European allies, certainly our Middle East allies, coming to the table and saying this is a valid goal that they're now joining us in to significantly eliminate Iran's military capabilities, as it was a emerging and certainly continuing threat to the region, Europe, and the United States. Now, I think what we need to see is what is that timeline, and how do they see that unfolding, both as a threat and the damage that's occurring within the area in doing so, and what do we see that we're able to impact. What is that timeline? And I think that impacts the issue of the War Powers Resolution. I certainly see it no interest at this time of participating or supporting a War Powers Resolution. I think the president's been very clear that this is a limited military action, that he believes to be limited in its time frame. And I think that this is one that, as I've just described, even our allies see as a valid military conflict to engage in.
Certainly real differences, though, among your colleagues about that, Congressman. Let's talk about Iran's response. They've gone after a number of their neighbors there in the Gulf, including what appears to be striking energy infrastructure, including an oil refinery plant in Saudi Arabia, per some of the video we've gotten into us here. So let's talk about the economic toll. We see stock futures way down, oil prices surging. What are your concerns if this does indeed, as the president says, goes 3-4 weeks or more? In one interview, he said it could be up to 6. About the economic toll, the pain that your average American will feel.
This is consistent with what we see as Iran as a threat. Iran being the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. And then, of course, their support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, their attack on commercial ways and waterways, and even their attack just on civilian populations. You're seeing that in their military response. It's not a military response, it's a civilian response, it's a commercial response. And that's what we're going to be seeing here. And that's why it's so important that their military capabilities be impacted, be removed, and be impacted in this exchange here. They are a significant threat to everyone in the region, and that's what you're seeing in their response.
Another question I have is about the Gulf states and countries in the region that have been hit by Iran. Missiles mostly intercepted, but some not, for sure. Are they going to get added protections as this continues? Because we've heard 2 weeks, we've heard 6 weeks. Let's assume, or for the sake of this question, this escalates or continues. Will they need added protection? Will they get added protection?
So what's so difficult about this, Mika, which is exactly what you're pointing out, is that this is a murderous authoritarian regime. And that's what makes this so difficult. I mean, they should be coming to the table as they look to, the Middle Eastern Gulf region. I mean, they are a threat to everyone. And as this unfolds, this is very, very difficult. And as we're trying to respond and pull together our allies in the region, the difficulty is in trying to contain this murderous authoritarian regime. There needs to be a point, which is why the president has said the people in Iran need to address and the hope for freedom for these people who've been oppressed by this regime is also the threat that has occurred to this region. Let's hope, as the intersection occurs of this military conflict, that this regime falls, and that hopefully the effects of what this threat is to the people in the region and to the threat of the people in Iran can be impacted.
So, Congressman, let's also talk about other potential consequences back here at home. There was this mass shooting over the weekend in Texas, and there's a lot we don't know there, but there's been some preliminary reporting that it may have been inspired by what's been happening in the Middle East right now. And that we know Iran has long boasted of having sleeper cells throughout the West. Remains to be seen whether that's true or not. But what are your concerns about some sort of terror attack here in the United States, particularly at a time where FBI, DHS could really gut some of its counterterrorism efforts, reassign some of those agents to things like immigration and deportation, and not focused on the possibility of an attack?
I mean, this is going to be a very, very important issue as we go back as Congress returns, because as you know, right now there's a partisan fight where the funding for Homeland is currently held up. I certainly hope that we can get past this partisan fighting so that we can get funding, the important funding to the Homeland, dislodged. There is certainly a threat to the Homeland that Iran poses. But also, as you look, internationally, we just had Putin say that in Khomeini's death, he lost a friend. And we have these murderous authoritarian regimes look to losing friends, this is certainly going to have changes in dynamics worldwide. And that is going to have an impact, I think, also, diplomatically. When we look at Ukraine, when we look at, our domestic threats, this is going to have implications that could have a positive implication as we look to what's happening in Ukraine and the threats that we're going to have to address here locally.
Republican member of the House Armed Services Committee and former chair of the Intel Committee, Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. We really appreciate it. Coming up on more.